G'day folks, Sapper here with another World of Warships video. Welcome to In Depth, the series with theory crafting and analysis where we see how deep rabbit holes can get. Before we get started, if this is your first Commonwealth video of mine, I suggest you go and check out my Commonwealth tech tree overview, or destroyers, or cruisers. Video links will be down in the description. In this video I am going to go over in detail my proposed Commonwealth Premiums. The ships I cover in this video are by no means an exhaustive list, but a variety of ships that complement the proposed tech-line ships and nations already present. If a nation or ship class is featured in the game or in the wider tech tree, I prioritise other options first so that we have a nice spread of gameplay styles and histories. First up, some caveats. The Commonwealth for the purposes of this video includes all the nations that were a member of the Commonwealth at that time, including countries such as India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Singapore and South Africa. A lot of ships will share similarities with Royal Navy ships. That's fine. Perth isn't the same as Leander, and a lot of differences between ships come down to things that wargaming arbitrarily define or tweak, such as reload, shell characteristics, torpedo arcs, concealment, or consumables. I try and include as many Commonwealth nations as possible right across the tech tree, as well as ships with a rich or interesting history. I am not an expert in naval history. What I have in this video is some basics that I've gleaned from some brief research, so please forgive any of my errors. I envisage the Commonwealth Premiums to firstly provide some variety. Yes, we have some battleship options, as the Commonwealth did operate a few battlecruisers and funded or had planned to fund a few battleships. The last priority I had was to make sure that gameplay and style was distinguishable from other ships in the Commonwealth tree, at tier and in class. I haven't pushed unique traits to their maximums, but taken a realistic approach based on Wargaming's premium releases to date. First up, let's pop in the existing premiums: Vampire, Perth, and Hater. Recently, Wargaming confirmed Mysore's release. She is slated to be at tier 6 at the recording of this video, so I'll pop her in there. Wargaming have mentioned they are working on Delhi, however with Mysore at tier 6, I'm not sure where they plan on placing her, so I'll be leaving her out of this video. I really wanted an Achilles, Delhi, or both in the tree, but I would have placed both at tier 6, so with the tech tree already having a couple of Leander types, I will not be covering Achilles or Delhi for now. So here are my ideas for some Commonwealth premiums. Tier 3, the Canadian protected cruiser Niobe. Niobe was commissioned into the Royal Navy on the 6th of December 1898, being involved in troop transport escort duties in the Boer War. She began her service with the newly formed Royal Canadian Navy on the 6th of September 1910, formally taking place on the 12th of September 1910. She was the first large ship in the Royal Canadian Navy. She engaged in various patrol duties up and down the American coast during World War I before finding herself in Halifax as a depot ship by 1917. Some members of her crew attempted to scuttle the ammunition ship SS Mont Blanc after she was rammed. While the Niobe crew members were boarding, Mont Blanc exploded, killing the boarding crew and damaging Niobe. The Halifax explosion was massive, and I suggest anyone who's interested to look into it. Niobe has the following specs: 16 single 152mm guns, 9.1 to 13.7 km range, 3 single 460mm torpedoes, 1 in the stern and 1 each broadside, 21 knot speed, and a heel. Niobe has an impressive number of guns, however, fairly average reload and speed. During her career, she was repaired a number of times. To represent this, I would give her a heel and lean on her slow and tanky idea. Should the heel cause issues for balance, I would have her damage control party to have an improved cooldown or duration. Implementing her 3 single torpedo tubes could be an interesting addition to the respected elder of the Canadian Navy. I would give her standard HE and AP options for tier and have her play somewhat similar to St. Louis. Tier 4 battlecruiser, New Zealand. New Zealand was an indefatigable class battlecruiser paid for by the New Zealand government. She served with distinction in World War I, participating in the Battle of Heligoland Bight, Raid on Scarborough, Battle of Dogger Bank, and Battle of Jutland. Of note, during the Battle of Jutland, she fired 420 12-inch shells, more than any other ship on either side, scoring confirmed hits on SMS Seydlitz, Schleswig-Holstein, and only receiving one shell in return. After the war, she did a tour of different Commonwealth dominions, including India, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, and Canada. New Zealand has the following specs: 4 twin 305mm guns, 15.8 to 17 kilometre range, 2 single 457mm torpedoes, 25 knot speed, heel, and plane options. New Zealand's 2 middle turrets are offset and echelon, as seen on ships like the German Tier 4 battleship Kaiser, and this limits their effective firing angles on the opposite side of the ship. Thanks to New Zealand's speed and plane options, as well as respectable firepower, I decided to place her at Tier 4. At Tier 4 she would see similar ships such as the German Kaiser or the Japanese Niobe. For added flavour, I have kept her torpedo armament. Playstyle, I would have her play much like Myogi, but only situationally being able to bring all guns on target, thanks to her turret setup. The trick will be making sure she feels like a battlecruiser, like Myogi, and not a battleship like Orion or Kaiser. Tier 5 Canadian destroyer, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan was an F-class destroyer that began life in the Royal Navy before being transferred to Canada on the 31st of May 1943. She is notable for surviving a 250 kilogram or 550 pound bomb that ruptured her hull, knocking out her engines and bending her propeller shafts, not to mention causing a lot of flooding. Somehow her crew were able to jettison weight and reach a speed of 12 knots to get her to Gibraltar for temporary repairs. Saskatchewan has the following specs: 4 single 120mm guns, 2 quadruple 533mm torpedoes, 36 knot speed, creeping smoke, Commonwealth hydro, speed boost, and depth charges. Saskatchewan should play more like a Royal Navy destroyer than a Commonwealth one, but have Hader-style consumables, including speed boost. I toyed with the idea of giving her a heel or improved DCP, however, Wargaming hasn't done such to a destroyer in the low to mid tiers, so I thought Hader's equipment kit would be appropriate. Tier 5 New Zealand light cruiser, Diomede. Diomede shares much of her history with Dunedin, assisting with the Hawke's Bay earthquake. However, she survived service through World War II, being decommissioned on the 5th of April 1946. Her executive officer from 30 to 33, Commander, later Admiral Victor Crutchley, went on to earn a Victoria Cross later in his career. Diomede for the most part engaged in patrols, including chasing down German blockade runner Idavold from Mexico to Cuba in 1940, only being prevented from capture by her German crew scuttling her. Diomede has the following specs: 6 single 152mm guns, 13 km range, 4 triple 533mm torpedoes, 2 banks on each side, 32 knot speed, creeping smoke, hydro, and depth charges. Diomede compared to Dunedin would trade some range for increased speed, agility, and DPM, reflecting her patrolling in later life. There are many options, however, with Diomede I didn't want to push her too far from Dunedin, considering how close the ships were for much of their career. Tier 6 Canadian destroyer, Sioux. Sioux was a 1942 V-class destroyer operated by Canada. She spent much of her time assisting the Royal Navy Home Fleet, notably escorting the aircraft carriers that attacked German battleship Tirpitz. She also engaged in shore bombardment of enemy positions during the invasion of Normandy, before returning to Home Fleet and engaging in operations in Norway. She was modernised after the end of World War II, however for the purposes of the game she should be in her initial configuration. Sioux has the following specs: 4 single 120mm guns, 2 quadruple 533mm torpedoes, 36 knot speed, creeping smoke, standard cruiser hydro, and depth charges. In my proposal, I would equip Sioux with standard cruiser hydro instead of the Commonwealth destroyer variant, reflecting her screening duties, and I would also increase her range compared to other destroyers at tier by around 10% to reflect her bombardment duties during the war. Tier 6 Malaysian battleship, Malaya. Malaya was a Queen Elizabeth class battleship paid for by the Federated Malay States. Malaya served until 1944, where she became an accommodation ship for a torpedo school. She is notable for surviving several heavy hits throughout her career and for flying the red, white, black, yellow ensign of the Federated Malay States. In the Battle of Jutland, she was hit 8 times and took major damage and heavy casualties. She engaged in patrol duties during the Second World War, managing to scare off Scharnhorst and Gneisenau on the 7th of March 1941, merely by her presence. On the 20th of March 1941, Malaya was hit by a torpedo from U-106. From there, she made temporary repairs at Trinidad and survived long enough to make her way to the New York Navy Yard. In 1943, her entire secondary armament was offloaded and her anti-aircraft armament was enhanced. However, she did not receive the comprehensive reconstruction that Warspite, Queen Elizabeth, and Valiant received in the interwar years. Malaya should be implemented in the game as her 1943 AA refit. I personally love the ship's motto, Malum Ferro Malus, or I bring evil to the evil. Malaya has the following specs: 4 twin 381mm guns, 17 to 18 km range, 4 single 533mm torpedoes, 2 each side, 24 knot speed, and improved heel. Malaya should play much like a Warspite or Queen Elizabeth, but without a spotter plane, 152mm secondaries, or many of the changes that the interwar refits provided. To balance these factors, her range should be around 17 to 18 kilometers, and she should have some form of improved heel in line with how many times her crew had to make emergency repairs. She did have improved AA, but to what extent wargaming would need to work out. To further differentiate her from Warspite or Queen Elizabeth, she could keep her 4 torpedo launchers for a bit of extra close quarters bite to make up for her lack of secondaries. Tier 7 Australian Heavy Cruiser, Australia. Australia was a Kent-designed county-class heavy cruiser operated, funnily enough, by Australia. She was commissioned on the 24th of April 1928 and decommissioned on the 31st of August 1954. She was awarded battle honours for Atlantic, Pacific, Coral Sea, Savo Island, Guadalcanal, New Guinea, Leyte Gulf, and Lingayen Gulf. Her career was busy and varied, with naval historian John Bastock commenting, "Australia probably fought more actions and steamed more miles than any other ship of the Royal Australian Navy during the Second World War." For the purposes of the game, Australia should be implemented in her 1944 kit. Australia has the following specs: 4 twin 203mm guns, 16.5 km range, 2 quadruple 533mm torpedoes, 32 knot speed, hydro or DFAA, plane options, and depth charges. Australia in many ways should resemble Royal Navy Surrey, however with the Commonwealth Cruiser shell flavour applied at the cost of no heel. That flavour being better shell ballistics and poorer reload, and favouring longer range gameplay. There may be a need for some sort of soft buffs in the agility area when compared to Surrey to help her outrange, but as usual, that will be for wargaming to balance. Tier 7 New Zealand Light Cruiser, Black Prince. Black Prince was a Bellona-type Dido-class cruiser operated by New Zealand. She spent much of the war assisting Arctic convoys, the Normandy landings, and as a part of the British Pacific Fleet. Her actions during the war include the sinking of torpedo boat T-29, damaging of T-24 and T-27 on the 25th of April 1944. She also supported bombardment in support of Utah beach landings, bombarding airfields in Crete, and the final bombardments of the Japanese mainland. She is notable after the war for her crew being involved in a series of mutinies by New Zealand sailors in 1947 over paying conditions. One sailor from Black Prince who walked off the job was at large for over 2 years before his arrest, detention, and dismissal. Black Prince has the following specs: 4 twin 133mm guns, 12 to 15 km range, 2 triple 533mm torpedoes, 33 knot speed, creeping smoke, hydro, and depth charges. Black Prince is armed with smaller caliber weapons and thus will have a shorter firing range and better DPM in game compared with Tech Tree Bellona. The range will need to be adjusted depending on the upcoming Captain Skills rework, as she would benefit from BFT and AFT under the current system. Balance-wise, the aim would be to have her range no further than about 15 kilometres. Otherwise, she functions much like Bellona, but with 133s instead of 152s. Her DPM would be higher, but her alpha strike lower, although her flavour, compared to other 130mm light cruisers, should still bias towards better alpha and less DPM. Tier 8 Canadian light cruiser, Ontario. Ontario was a Swiftsure class cruiser that saw service with Canada, but too late to see any active service in the Second World War. She is notable for being involved in some post-war civil assistance, some large training cruises, and taking part in a fleet review to celebrate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. For a more in-depth historical look at Ontario, see Drakenfeld's Ontario video, I believe it's 148. Ontario has the following specs: 3 triple 152mm guns, 16 kilometre range, 2 triple 533mm torpedoes, 31 knot speed, creeping smoke or radar, hydro, heel, and depth charges. Ontario is similar to Swiftsure, but has a reduced range and speed in exchange for a heel. To add a bit of further depth and to complement her reduced range, her shell ballistics could be adjusted to be more conducive to island firing, giving Ontario her own flavour. Tier 8 Canadian battleship, Canada. Canada is a theoretical modified 381mm King George V class battleship. In World of Warships, the version is represented in-game as Monarch. Various Commonwealth countries debated the purchase or procurement of different warships. Canada is a purely theoretical purchase of a 381mm King George V class battleship. Canada has the following specs: 3 triple 381mm guns, 18 to 20 kilometre range, 28 knot speed, standard heel, and plane options. In comparison to Monarch, Canada should have improved accuracy, mitigating most of the problems Monarch has. She should also have standard battleship HE and normalised AP. The cost for all of this is that Canada's heel is the standard battleship variant as opposed to any of the enhanced versions seen on Monarch or on Lion or Conqueror. In playstyle, she would resemble Royal Navy's Vanguard, but have a majority of her firepower forward-facing, mitigating much of Vanguard's turret angle weaknesses. Tier 8 Australian destroyer, Quiberon. Quiberon was a Q-class destroyer operated by Australia. Quiberon initially served in the North Atlantic as a convoy escort. In October 1942, she assisted British naval forces in support of Allied landings in North Africa. On the 28th of November 1942, while operating near Tunisia, she attacked and destroyed the Italian submarine Desi. Quiberon then assisted in the destruction of Italian destroyer Lupo. She performed many escort duties for the remainder of the war, taking part in some operations in support of troop landings. After the war, she served in the East Indies, carrying troops and retrieving prisoners of war. In the early 1950s, Quiberon was converted into an anti-submarine frigate. Quiberon has the following specs: 4 single 120mm guns, 2 quadruple 533mm torpedoes, 32 knot speed, creeping smoke, Commonwealth hydro, and depth charges. Quiberon is different to Tech Tree Napier owing to still operating single turret mounts and lacking access to radar in the smoke slot or speed boost. In exchange for this and her mediocre speed, she should have increased DPM and, subject to submarine implementation, improved ASW capabilities, reflecting her duties during the war and her post-war conversion. Tier 9 Pakistani destroyer, Khyber. Khyber began life as Cadiz and is a battle-class destroyer. In 1956, Cadiz was refitted and modernised and sold to Pakistan as PNS Khyber. Khyber was destroyed by missile fire during the Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. Khyber has the following specs: 2 twin 113mm guns, 2 Pentad 533mm torpedoes, 34 knot speed, creeping smoke, Commonwealth hydro, DFAA, and depth charges. Khyber should function as an improved screening and torpedo destroyer, operating more modern and powerful torpedoes compared to other Commonwealth or Royal Navy destroyers. I would have her with a fixed consumable loadout to amplify her primary weakness, being speed and a lack of a rear turret. I envisage Kaibar as primarily a torpedo destroyer with 12 to 15 kilometer torpedoes with improved reload, while still having some of the gunpowder, albeit limited to the front of the ship. The other alternative I toyed with was leaning into smoke and radar combination like US Black. However, I don't approve of smoke and radar combinations in a gameplay sense, but it is another build option for Kaiba and one that has precedence. In conclusion, my proposed premiums may not be the most notable ships that Commonwealth operated. I'm not a very knowledgeable person when it comes to naval history. But from a gameplay perspective, I believe most of them have a nice little story, often having elements of their history tying into their specifications and playstyle. The biggest factor to consider with my premium array is this list is by no means exhaustive, but complements the nation and classes that I have placed in the Commonwealth tech tree. We have a variety of representatives, styles, and stories, and in that sense I am very proud of the premium lineup. Niobe, New Zealand, Saskatchewan, Diomede, Sioux, Malaya, Australia, Black Prince, Ontario, Canada, Qiabarun, Kaibar. What do you think of them? Let me know down below. Alternatively, if you'd change a ship or the flavour of anything, how would you do it? I really would love to hear if you have better options or ships with better stories, particularly if they are of the same class or nation as those above. I based my decisions primarily on variety. My knowledge of naval history is nothing to write home about. I have yet to decide if when I will release a Commonwealth aircraft carriers video, primarily because I want the meta situation to settle before I finalise my idea. However, I should note that it would be based around smaller size, more modern idea as seen on Saipan. Regardless, I may or may not release an in-depth video on the aircraft carriers, but time will tell. Thanks for watching, stay sane, and I'll catch you in the next one.